Thank you. It's great to be here. And thank you to everyone who's here today. I will try to speak slowly because I realize that some of you are not native speakers of English, so I will try to respect that and do my best to slow down. Sometimes I get so excited about this topic that I get a little bit too fast. I'm going to talk to you today about preparing for the digital age. How do you realize technology-enhanced learning in your organization? What kinds of things do you need to be aware of? And this is kind of an add-on to what was discussed at the last Lunch and Learn that I think you also attended from Dr. Strota from last month, where he talked about how to realize technology within your curriculum. And this is looking at more, how do you realize it within the organization as a whole? So, Bianca, you're going to have to help me here and make sure I get on to the next page. Okay. The first thing that I'd like to talk about is the trends, because we're going through a huge amount of change within education. The question that Cosma and Clark posed many years ago about whether or not technology was going to influence education is no longer a question of will it, but the question is more to what degree and to what extent will it influence education. So I'd like to talk first about some of the trends that are happening within technology, within the delivery frameworks that we're using, and also our pedagogy, our teaching and learning approaches. So I'll go into those, and then I'll talk about a little bit about the systems that are affected. Now, I don't know if I'll be able to answer all of the questions that Bianca said, if I'll be able to give you practical examples, because much of this is very contextual. Much of it is very dependent upon your organization, your culture, the different things that your leadership, the people that you have working within your organization. But I will try to give you a few tips along the way. So what are some of the technology trends? What's really happening right now within education? Well, first of all, we've got Web 2.0, Web 3.0 happening. Artificial intelligence is a big thing moving into education. Learning analytics, of course, is on everyone's lips. They were talking about, measuring students' performance, using those analytics to define the kind of support that we'll provide for students, to give them what they need in order to succeed within the classroom. And then we've got mobile learning. More and more we can access our education from our applications, from our telephones, using apps. Then, of course, we've got things that are coming along the line, which, some of these I took from the Horizon report that just came out last month, and that will be in the list of references in the PowerPoint that I'll send you, or that Bianca will send you afterwards. And these are things like augmented reality, virtual reality, things like mixed reality, and there's a lot of different things that are coming up here within this area. The next thing is there's some different delivery frameworks that we're being confronted with. The way that we present the way that we deliver the education or the training that we provide. Massive open online courses, MOOCs, of course, everyone is familiar with those. We've got social media coming at us, incorporating that into the classroom. Open source software is another area that we're being confronted with within education. We've also got new kinds of messaging intranets within the organization with team-based messaging and learning. And then we've got things like X-Appies that are tracking and recording learning in the background. And then another thing that also came up in the Horizon report last month, we've got new learning spaces and trying to design those learning spaces to support learners to become more autonomous and to have more personalized learning environments. So we're being faced with a lot of technology. We're being hit with a lot of different frameworks for delivering our education. And then we've got a lot of pedagogies that we're dealing with. And these are things like design thinking, cultures of innovation, where we're allowing students an opportunity to make mistakes as they learn, and not punish them for it, but to give them the freedom to make mistakes as they go forward. We've got open pedagogy. We've got open educational resources. We're moving into less of the chalk and talk environment and more into the learner-centered, student-centered environment. And we're doing this through active learning, through project-based learning, experiential learning, making it authentic, very learner-centered, and giving learners an opportunity, or not really just giving them an opportunity, but pushing them to be more self-directed and more self-determined in their learning. So there's all of these different factors that we're being confronted with within education. It isn't just the new technologies that are coming, but it's the new approaches that will support us in delivering more learner-centered environments and the technology that supports those pedagogies. In addition to those, we've also got a number of tensions, what I like to call tensions, forces, different things that are kind of pressing on us from all sides, and forcing us to really make some changes within higher education. We've got changing demographics. The population is growing older, but they still want to learn. There's a need for more lifelong learning. We've got more diversity within our groups, within our learning groups. We've got a large range of learners. You don't have your standard learner coming in for higher education that follows the standard path. They're in it for the long run. We've got new learner groups. We're looking at digital equity. We're trying to make sure that everyone has access to education as much as possible. There's industry demand. The industry is asking us to provide employees or provide graduates who have soft skills, that are digitally fluent and literate. That we provide competency-based education, that our students come out of university being able to perform very quickly, so there isn't a lot of upskilling involved. There's, of course, increased costs and then reduced funding at the same time. We're also dealing with new organizational structures. We're looking at more flexible, lifelong learning, partnerships with other universities, and then, of course, there's the student need. More and more students are saying they want technology, they want to have personalized learning, they want to have modularized degrees, and they want to have new and different learning formats. They don't at times they want the chalk and talk lecture, but many times they want new learning formats where they can actually interact and be more involved. There's also a need for recognition of what students have accomplished prior to coming into the university for a program. For example, in our graduate program, we offer prior learning and recognition, and that allows students to come in and say, okay, I've taken this course already, or I've had this training, I have this competency, and then apply it as credit toward their degree. So there's a need for that as well. There's also a need for crossing that achievement gap. Many students are saying, I don't have what I need to be able to hit the floor running when I start at my job or start working in the work world. So you need to give me what I need so that I can perform from day one in the workforce. So these are a lot of different tensions and forces that are affecting us. Now, this slide, for those of you that attended Joachim and Dr. Stotter's presentation, I actually stole it from him because I thought it was a good tie-in to what I'll talk about next. A lot of times we look at technology trends and we say, okay, how does this fit into my organization? How can I use this in my organization? Or if you're an instructor, you're thinking, okay, how can I use this in my classes? What kind of smart or mobile phones or devices can I use? How do I incorporate social media? What kind of cloud computing? How will that influence my approach as an instructor? What kind of analytics will I use? How will Internet of Things, how will that impact us within the organization and intelligent systems? And I liked this particular slide because it shows the technology trends on one side, but then it also looks at the implications for the organization on the other. And I think when you're looking at a technology-enhanced learning solution, you're not just looking at how can I incorporate this technology within my courses? You need to look at it in a holistic manner so that you're looking at the entire organization and how it impacts different aspects of the organization and how you can better prepare for the change that's coming with the new technology. Some of the implications that are listed here, there's new business models, new markets, there's new innovations coming, there's ways to improve productivity through the use of different systems, different technologies. There's more interaction possibilities with customers. I mean, this is a very good example, Adobe Connect. Interacting with you here through the webinar. This wouldn't have been possible just a few years ago. And also to provide people with workplace flexibility. What are some of the drivers of future higher education? I wanted to include this. This just came out in a report from Ulf Daniel Ehlers from Karlsruhe, and he did a Delphi study of nearly 50 experts within higher education, asking them not just what do you think is going to be happening in higher education, but what kinds of things are driving us and what kinds of skills are we going to need. And these are the drivers that he identified through this Delphi study, looking at what's impacting higher education. There needs to be more of a future skill focus. This will be something that will be prevalent. There will be multi-institutional pathways. There will be pathways to the institution, within the institutions, then also outside of the institution with other institutions as well. There will be a development of a lifelong university. So we need to be preparing for universities' learning environments that are lifelong. And then finally, more and more personalization of academic learning. So these are some of the things that are driving us right now in higher education, according to the leaders, according to the leaders that were surveyed by Dr. Ehlers. So so now we've looked at some of the trends. We've looked at the things that are hitting us from all sides. And one of the things that I mentioned is that we need to look at education and the impact of technology within our organizations as being a holistic. Our response needs to be holistic. We need to look at things not just from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to incorporate technology within my curriculum, so I'll be using different technology to present my courses. We need to be looking at it at in a much bigger way in terms of how will this impact our organization as a whole. This is an example from Greville Rumble where he looks at distance education as a system. I'm going to show you a couple of different models of looking at education as a system because none of these models are perfect. I find that sometimes there are things missing, sometimes there are things that maybe don't fit anymore. This is from 1997, although it's very accurate. It was designed with industrialization in mind, looking at the open university, and also because that's the highest form of industrialization that we currently have within education is really producing materials in an industrialized way, almost like you're working on an assembly line of getting everything done. And so the approach is really what Greville presents here, is looking at distance education as the different systems and then considering how does technology support us within these different systems? How does it impact us? How do these systems interact with each other? And these are systems, for example, the logistical side, your personnel, your marketing, your financial departments, and then, of course, your materials. How will we deliver our materials? And that's just not the handbooks, but how are we going to design our courses? How will we provide tutoring support? How will we assess courses? How will we distribute, assess performance? How will we distribute our materials to students? And then, of course, you've got the regulatory aspect, looking at the subsystem of planning and managing and making decisions about your courses. And then I really like this at the bottom where Grevel talks about the student life cycle, from recruitment to enrolling the student, moving them into the classrooms, they're studying, they're learning, the assessment, and then finally the certification. So this is one view of education, and it's from a distance education perspective, but it's important to us because within technology enhanced learning, we didn't just start over when higher education said, okay, we want to incorporate technology. Distance education has a very long history of incorporating technology and creating systems for technology within their organizations, because technology has always been the delivery framework within distance education systems. So it's good for us to reflect and look at some of the things that have been done in the past in distance education. This is another example, which comes from Moore and Kearsley. They wrote a book called Distance Education, A Systems View, which was published in 2012. And I think this top part of the model really covers more of the organization as a whole. You're doing your needs assessment, you're looking at your resources, your personnel, and then looking at the controlling aspect. What I really like about this model is it includes also the policy aspect. Policy can often make or break decisions about realizing technology within your organization. Now, the lower half that Moore and Kearsley talk about in this model is more of the instructional design aspect. It's looking at, what kind of content sources do you have? How do you organize how is your institution organized? How do you manage your content experts and do needs assessment, and then moving that into the course design? How will that then move into the course design? How will you use that information to design your courses? And of course, we look at a whole team of people that are working at creating courses in technology enhanced learning. We don't just see the instructor being the primary person doing this. They need the advice of instructional designer. They need graphic designers. They need web producers. They need people to guide them and support them in preparing their courses for online, or to give them advice about what works best. And then, of course, decisions have to be made about the delivery, what kind of media will be used. Interaction is very key. How will interaction occur? There needs to be interfaces with librarians, with the help desk, if there's a learning center, if there's guidance counselors to provide support. And of course, the instructor is at the center of providing support. And then there's looking at the learning environment itself. Uh-oh, what happened here? Okay, This next one is from Anke Hanft, who was our former director here at the Center for Lifelong Learning. And she and her colleagues put this together, this particular model, which is, how do we move into lifelong learning? What is it that we need to do? And this is a translation of what Dr. Stotter presented at the last Lunch and Learn. So please bear with me, those that were there. Basically, she's identified, or they've identified, 4 different categories of areas that need to be considered if you want to move when you want to move your organization into being more of a lifelong learning institution. So we've looked at 2 examples from distance education, and this particular example is when you're moving in the direction of lifelong learning. What do you need to consider? Well, you need to be considering recognition of prior learning and competencies. What kind of marketing and distribution strategies will you be using? Quality management, and of course cost and financial management. And then what Anke and her colleagues have done is they've looked at the different functions within the organization, the different aspects of program planning, program development, program management, and then what you need to consider as you move into lifelong learning, different aspects within within those areas that need to be considered. So I've presented you some different models of, how does the system look? So we've looked at the technology, what's impacting us within higher education. Then we looked at higher education as a holistic system. What are the different components? What are the different subsystems? Now what I'd like to talk a little bit about is some of the models and frameworks for change. Because if you are moving from a primarily non-technology using organization into being one where you're using technology to deliver your curriculum, there's a really strong element of change. And so you need to be able to prepare for that change within your organization. And what I'd like to present here is some of the models and frameworks that you might want to consider if you are moving into using technology and how that will impact your organization. Now this one, this is from Rogers, and it looks at the 5 stages in the innovation process. What happens first? Well, you're initiating change within the organization. You're setting your agenda, and then you're trying to fit it in to the organization as a whole. How will this innovation be realized? And then the next part, once a decision has been made, yes, we're going to realize this innovation within the organization, we then move into the phase of implementing that, which involves redefining, restructuring the organization, adapting the organization to bring in those technologies that are going to be used, whether it's a learning management system or new or different ways of doing work within the organization using technology. And then clarifying where are the relationships between the systems. As you saw previously in the presentation, there are a number of different systems that we're looking at within higher education environments, and we need to find ways so that each of those subsystems are working together in the most effective and efficient way. So how does that innovation, how does that impact the different systems, and how will their relationships be once the innovation or the technology is realized? And then finally, the last phase is making it routine. When does the technology or the innovation become routine within the organization? This next example is from Morton, and it looks at his framework for strategic change within the organization. And you'll see he's got a number of different external forces that are pressing in on the higher education. And he talks about strategy. There needs to be strategy. Also, you need to identify what technology you're going to use in order to realize your strategy. I just read something, and then of course culture, and that's what I'm going to talk about just briefly. JISC just published something, published a report about digitalization in higher education, and this is in the references, so when you get the slides, if you want to look up some of these references, they'll be in the PowerPoint presentation. But culture was seen by these organizations that were part of JISC's research as being the leading barrier for realizing change within the organization. Over 70% of the higher education institutions said the culture of the organization was a barrier to realizing change. Now that's a big number, especially when you think that lack of skills was something like 50% was one of the it was reported as 50% of the institutions said lack of competencies and skills is a problem within our institution in realizing change. So culture, really, your culture, the structures that are within your organization, the processes, the people that are there, the different roles that they have, these all need to be taken into consideration when you're making change within your organization. Now, this is an example. Dr. Stada talked about this also a little bit during his webinar, which was about how do we use technology then within our curriculum? We've realized change within the organization. Now, what do we need to do in terms of deciding what technology to use? And these two models that I'm going to talk about next are just two examples of models that you can use if you're trying to decide on what kind of media to use within your curriculum. Now, this particular model is from Tony Bates, and it's based on his actions model, which he defined, I think it was back in, I want to say 2000, but it might have been the late 1990s. And he's recently, or I guess a couple of years ago, updated this model to be called the sections model. And here, the areas that he looks at is, who are your students? What do you know about them? What are their needs in terms of technology? Ease of use, how easy is the technology to use? What does it cost? What kind of teaching and learning is going to be needed? What kind of instructional design can be used with the technology? How much does the technology support interaction within the classroom? And then, of course, what are the organizational requirements? How will this impact the organization? What's new about the technology? And speed. How quickly can we get up to speed or get this implemented within our organization? Now, this may seem like a really simple process to go through, going through sections, but what we always have to realize is that our decisions about the technology that we use are very contextual. The decision that I make here at the Center for Lifelong Learning about the kinds of technology I will use with my student and my students and my target groups is very different than, for example, what the University of South Africa may choose to do in terms of the delivery of and the technologies that they use, because our contexts are very different, and the technology that is available is different. Our environments are different. So these are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration when you're deciding on the kinds of technology that you'll use. Now, this is an example, and that was also talked about briefly. Joachim talked about the Addie Model, and this is an expansion of that model. Hibbets and Travins, they don't just look at assessing technology fit, designing, developing, implementing, evaluating. They look at also assessing learner needs, defining those, conceptualizing those throughout the process. So they've expanded on Addie to incorporate more of the technology aspect. So this is another model that you could use when you're looking at realizing technology within your curriculum. Now, another thing that we need to talk about if we're going to talk about technology-enhanced learning and realizing it within the organization is we really need to talk about what kinds of skills and competencies are critical for managers and educators. What do they need to have in order to be successful in realizing technology within the organization? And so I'll talk a little bit about those here. This is also from Dr. Eller's presentation, or his Delphi study, where he's identified some of the skills that we need our students to have. So this is the student perspective, but I also think that it applies to our instructors as well. Because, as instructors, we are models for our students in terms of, the skills and competencies that we have, that they learn these also from us as instructors. So these are skills that Dr. Ellers has identified in his Delphi study as very important future skills for our students. And these are things like, the ability to work autonomously, that they're able to reflect, digital literacy, that they have a future mindset, that they can collaborate, communicate, that they can self-direct, that they can initiate things on their own, and self-efficacy is also very important. So these are just some of the skills that our students are going to need. Now, what kinds of skills and competencies are needed? And this is based on the European Union Skills and Competencies Framework for Educators that was published in just a couple of years ago. And it looks at really what kind of professional competencies do we need in our educators? What do our instructors need to have? And what kind of teaching competencies do they need to have? And then what kind of learner competencies? So this is also a view on our learners and what they need, but it also looks at our educators and instructors. What do they need for skills and competencies? And I realize I'm really brushing this over, giving you just an overview of all of the things that you need. I'm not giving you the one-stop answer to the question of how do I prepare my organization for technology-enhanced learning, because the reality is it's just not possible to do in one PowerPoint presentation. So some of the things that skills and competencies that our educators will need, well, they need to be professionally engaged, and they need to be networked, and they need to be, they need to be open researchers doing reflective practice, working with others, not just within the organization, but also outside of the organization. Some of their teaching and learning competencies that they need, they of course need to be able to access digital resources, be able to identify what resources are best. They'll need to be able to teach and learn in an online environment or in an environment that uses technology. Collaborative learning, self-regulated learning are going to be very important. And then assessment will be important in terms of, what kind of strategies are they going to be using, how will they give feedback to students. And then this is also very important because what technology is doing, what we're seeing happening in the classrooms is technology is allowing us to empower our learners. Our learners are able to become more self-directed. They're able to become more self-determined in their learning. So it isn't just a matter of the instructor being the guru. The learner can now go out and find the answers to their questions without needing the instructor. So we're shifting the focus of the educator being the sage on the stage to becoming more of the guide on the side, or what I read from the Online Learning Consortium a couple years ago, the ace in the digital space, which I thought was a great way to describe it. Then what other skills and competencies really facilitating learner digital competence, being an example for our learners on how to communicate using digital tools, how to be literate with those tools, how to use them responsibly, and also how to create content, how to work together, how to solve problems. So those are some examples of educator competencies, learner competencies, and then we've got manager competencies. What kinds of things do we need in terms of manager competencies? And this is something that I got from training industry, where they identified some of the major competency areas. And these are things, as you can read here, things like, finding solutions, identifying needs, managing technology, optimizing processes. These are all things that managers do throughout the day. One of the problems I personally have with this graphic is it puts managing technology in a box in the corner. And really, if I were to redo this graphic, I would say this infiltrates every aspect, because technology helps us to identify needs, it helps us to develop and deliver solutions, it helps us in aligning our strategies to make sure that our processes are optimized, to improve our performance, and to really use our resources in the best way. So I do have a little bit of a problem with this particular graphic in terms of manager competencies, but it is a good example of the kinds of competencies that we need in our managers today. I've included this graphic just to give you an idea of what we're dealing with in terms of being educators or being leaders, managers within learning organizations. This is a graphic that was put together oh gosh, what was his name? I know it's on here somewhere. They put the hotel logo really big up there. I think it was Wadsworth or something like that. Anyway, it will be in the references list. And what this is it looks at all of the learning theories that are out there that we have to choose from. Right? So we need to be able to have, as instructors, as educators, as managers in higher education environments, we need to have a really strong knowledge base. And that needs to be a knowledge base in both theory and also in principles, but also in terms of practice. You know, how do we take those theories and principles and how do we apply them in practice? Because what we're going to be confronted with over time is that our students and our students will also be confronted with this. Technology is going to change. It's going to keep changing. This is going to date me, but when I went to university, we didn't use computers. We didn't have iPads. We didn't have mobile phones. No one had a personal computer. We didn't even have a computer center that we could go to, except if you were in programming. And so it's really, there's so much change that's happened. You know, what we're going to be teaching our students now, or what we are going to be using in our organizations, is going to change over time. And it may change very dramatically. It's very difficult to predict the future. And what we want to create is we want to create and develop reflective practitioners so they'll be able to adapt to that change as they're confronted with it within the work environment. So in order to do that, I believe very strongly there needs to be a strong knowledge base of theory and principle and of practice before you integrate technology. And anytime you're incorporating technologies to support theory and practice, you need to think about how it's going to impact your learners, how it's going to be used within the environment. It's never a good idea to say, oh, wow, that's really a cool technology. I better put it in my classroom. Terry Anderson, I love this quote from him because it's so very true when you're considering using technology within the classroom. And that is that technology and pedagogies is a very complex dance. And that if you want to have really good quality distance education or online education environments, you need to have synchronization between the technology and the pedagogy. And he defines this or describes this as technology really setting the beat and the timing, and pedagogy deciding what are going to be the moves to that beat. So, and now I'd like to talk just briefly about some of the challenges and barriers that we're confronted with when we're trying to realize change. I mentioned before the JISC report talked about culture being the biggest barrier to realizing change within organizations. So if you are going to realize technology in your organization, be aware that the culture may have to change within your organization. And that's a huge, huge task to undertake. You may have financial constraints. There may not be the IT capacity. They may not have the capability to make the decisions. There's other challenges. Leadership can often be an issue. There may not be the skills or the competencies. You may not have the sponsorship that you need or people that understand how change is going to impact the organization at all of the different levels and within all of the systems. There may not be project management processes in place, or the people doing the project management don't have the skills or have the information to make really good decisions. There may be resistance to change. People don't like to change. It's a known fact that people are generally are risk aversive. Or there may be perhaps tired of change. Too much change is happening within the organization. And finally, lack of training and support. Now, what kinds of things can you do to make sure that you'll be able to get through all of this without having too many problems? Some of the success factors that we've identified here at the center and what the research has shown, you really need to have executive leadership and support. You need to have a champion for change within your organization. you need to get buy-in from key stakeholders. You can't just have top-down pressure in making decisions. You also need to have that bottom-up buy-in from key stakeholders. There needs to be a culture of innovation, which means that people have the freedom or feel that they have the freedom to make mistakes, to take risks, to have something flop, because you want to make those decisions about whether something is going to work. You want to be able to test things out before you go throughout the whole organization and make change happen. Empowering change champions in the organization, and that's just not identifying those people, but it's also giving them, really empowering them to be able to make decisions, to make change happen, and sustaining those people. You need to be able to support them throughout. Strategic plans for digitalization, there needs to be really a digital plan. You know, how are we going to attack technology within our organization? And then cross-checking across your processes, across your strategic plans, and your mission. You know, do all of these align? You know, and making adjustments as necessary. So that's why the strategic plan has to be a flexible one. Then, of course, there needs to be faculty and learning support and training across your organization. And communication needs to be open, it needs to be continuous, and it needs to be transparent. This quote at the bottom is from the JISC report that I referenced a couple of times. And I thought that this was very accurate in terms of, you know, what's confronting higher education institutions today. There really is a massive demand for digitization of the organization to improve processes, workflow, reporting, student experience, staff experience. And when you read this, you realize that change as a result of digitization and technology is going to impact all systems within the organization. It won't just impact one. So there needs to be an awareness of how that change is going to happen. And now this is the part where I jump in and talk about our new program at C3L. And I'm just going to go through this briefly because we are having an online information session at the end of this month where we'll be talking about the program more. We just started offering this fall, or this winter, we will be offering a Master of Arts in Managing Technology-Enhanced Learning. And that's really looking at how can you realize technology-enhanced learning throughout your organization and the impact that it may have, or that it will have on different systems within the organization. Who is the program designed for? Well, it's specifically for working adults. It can be taken online, so you can access the class anytime you want and anywhere that you want. We have, not only do we have an online learning management system, an online learning environment, we also have an online app so that you can download to your mobile phone and learn from your mobile phone. And then we've got a number of different groups that this particular program will address. These are some of the courses that are available within the MTEL program. There will be required courses and elective courses, and as you can see, there are a number of courses that address the different systems. We're looking at quality management, project management, organizational management, diversity management, the entire student life cycle. But not only that, we're looking at different principles and theories that we need to think about before we start using technology-enhanced learning. We need to look at the research aspects. We need to look at learner support within the organization, as well as the design of technology-enhanced learning environments. So the program really, what we try to do is what we will try to be doing is looking at your particular context. You bring your context to the classroom, and then we work with you as you're learning these topics to make that context, to apply these different principles, theories, ideas, models, frameworks to your context. So that's a little bit of background about the program, and just to go over just briefly what the key features of the program are. It's a fully online program. We take a holistic view. We look at the whole organization, not just one aspect, for example, instructional design. It's international. We've got a global network of expert researchers, educators, and managers. We have a close relationship with the Center of Open Education Research, and we will be drawing many of those experts from that center to teach in the program and to be visiting experts within the program. It's applicable and practical. The program is built on many years of delivering online learning through our partnership with an institution in the United States, and we've now moved away from that institution and created our own program, but it's based solidly in over 20 years of experience. And one of the things our students have said in the past is, what I really love about this program is what I learned today I can apply tomorrow, and that for us is very important, because we don't want to just have theory and models, but also to provide some guidance on how you can realize this within your environment. We'll talk about technology, the how and the why. We'll be using open educational resources, open pedagogy, and the program will be personalized. Your instructors and mentors will be there to guide you and to provide support, and of course we'll have technical support for the learning environment too. And again, we'll be using prior learning assessment and recognition, so that competencies and skills that you have from prior learning you can then apply to the program. So that's the MTEL in a nutshell. If you want to know more about the program, please do come to our information session. There will be one on May 27th at 6 o'clock, 18 Uhr, 1800 hours, Central European Summertime, and also on July 9th at 12 o'clock Central European Summertime. So that's basically it. That's my presentation. And I hope it was helpful, and please ask any questions you might have. I realize it was a lot of information in a very compact time, and I did that for a reason, because one really needs to recognize that this is not just an instructional design decision if you decide to use technology in your organization. That technology can impact all different systems, all different aspects of the organization. So, questions?
Okay, we have a few minutes left. Let's see. First of all, thanks a lot for the presentation, Lisa.
You're welcome.
And we're just waiting, maybe some questions.
I've completely rolled them over. Too much information and everything in English.
Okay. More about the program. They can hear on the OnInfo event, and the dates are in your presentation, I've seen.
We also have them on our website. You can register from our website, so be sure to check out the website and see what you would need to do, what you would need to get into the program, or what you would need to come to the information session. We do have a lot of information on the website.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
There's a question I just see. Somebody is asking, I wonder how this would work in the lifelong program for IT security specialists. So the question is, how would the IT part or in the IT sector?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's very similar to what we're doing within technology and within our MTEL program. There of course will need to be theory, there will need to be knowledge transfer, you'll need to be giving them the basics about data security, but then you'll also need to design a program that is adaptable and flexible to your student needs. So in that particular situation, I would define, what's your basic student need? How can I address those needs? How can I use technology to support me in addressing their basic understanding of security, and then allow for flexibility to incorporate new technologies as they arise, because I know data security, technical security is something that changes very rapidly, very quickly. So I think this is an area that would also need to be considered. I think modularization is very important, so you'd have that base, and then you would need to be able to add on, for example, with certificates or additional programs, if that's what the question is referring to in terms of how you could realize lifelong learning within a program, so to speak. Does that answer your question? Be sure to type in if it is.
Just waiting with another question, I see.
Okay, no question.
Okay, no question. Okay, it was very interesting. Thank you very much, and no question from her side. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and there was one reply to the question.
Okay, great. Great. I mean, it's very difficult to create lifelong learning organizations. If you look at the work that Anke Hampt has done with her colleagues, and as I said, this will be in the references at the end of the presentation. They really do look at the entire organization and the impact that moving toward lifelong learning will have on the organization and what things you need to consider. And of course, technology plays a very important role in any kind of lifelong learning, because most of our learners are very busy. I mean, they don't have time to say, okay, I'm going to take a couple of years off and I'm going to get my degree. They need to be able to have learning that's accessible, that's flexible, and available to them wherever they are and whenever they need it. And that's why we've developed this online program to meet the needs of people that just want to be able to access learning whenever they need to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I see at the moment there are no further questions.
Everyone's eating lunch.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so that for me would be to say thank you to you all. Thank you for listening, for the presentation, for the questions. I have learned a lot again, like always in our Lunch and Learn webinars. I hope to see you again in further webinars. Go to our website, there are the Lunch and Learn webinars. We have always new sessions. From my side, just have a good day. I will switch to an evaluation sheet or a site, and I would be happy if you would state some comments there. Just do it, and maybe you might fill in if the presentation content was helpful for you, and what further topics you would like for Lunch and Learn sessions. That's from my side. Have a good day.
Thank you, Bianca. Thanks for moderating.
Okay.
And thank you, everyone, for coming. It was great to have you here.
Bye-bye.